We continue now at the top of Daf Mem Vav Amid Beis in Meseches Bava Basra. This is Bava Basra Daf 46b. On the previous summit, the Gemara was discussing the launderers in Pumbedisa who are Ramoim, who are swindlers, they're cheaters. And the case over here is a person says, I gave my garment to you that you should clean it. And the launderer simply says, it's not true, you never gave it to me. And the person says back, I have witnesses that see that you have a garment that appears to be mine. And the launderer says, well, I'm not going to take it out to have you look at it because based on these kind of claims that you're making, which are baseless, there's no responsibility of mine to take out someone else's garment that it should be inspected. And Rava says that's actually a good claim, even though the person is a Rama, he's doing this because he wants to steal the garment, but still that is a good claim. You don't have to take out the garment to be inspected in such a case. And the proof is, Ra'ah Tanya, in the Brisa says that it was seen. If it was actually seen and could be identified in the hands of the launderer, so then that does take away his claim of Lo Hayu Devar Me'olam, that I never received it. But if they're just saying, if the witnesses are just saying, we see a garment that appears to be this person's garment, that would not be enough. And the Rashbam explains, Ra'ah Tanya, Ra Taliso Biyad Ha'uman. He sees his talis in the hand of the craftsman. Sharoa Achshav Uva He sees it now with witnesses. Avol Zeh Ino Roa Taliso Biyad Zeh Ha'uman. But in this case over here, he doesn't see it right now in the possession of the Uman. V'gam Ha'edim Kishara'u. And also the witnesses, when they did see it, Lo Hikiru Im Zehu, they weren't able to identify whether or not it was really his. And so therefore, again, that's why in this case the launderer really does have a good claim. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Ashi says, V'ichachim, let's say the person is smart, meaning this person who's coming to the launderer trying to get back his garment, he can do something which he'll be able to get his garment back as follows. V'ichachim, if he's smart, mashvi le'ra, he can make it a situation where he will be able to see the garment in the following way. D'yamar le, because he'll say to him as follows, Amai tefistale, why are you grabbing my garment? Why are you trying to take my garment? Lav mishum de islach gaboy, isn't it because I owe you something, I owe you some money, and hashta afkinu v'sheminu, so if that's the case, let's take it out, we'll evaluate how much the garment is worth, shkol at didach, and then you can take what is yours, ve'eshkol anodidi, and I'll take what is mine. Essentially, the person can say this to try to induce the launderer to take out the garment so they can see the garment. The Rashbam here explains, v'chachem hatoveya, if the person making the claim is smart, matzi mashvi le'ra, he can make it a situation where he does see the garment, meaning, yachol lishtadel le'uman b'dvar, he can say certain things to the Uman, and that will convince the Uman unknowingly to show it to him in front of witnesses. And once he sees it, then he'll be able to take it from him. Because as we said in the previous Amud, an Uman cannot establish a chazaka if we actually see the garment. So he just has to do something to be able to identify the garment. And what can he do? He can say in a clever way, in this fashion, he can say, why are you taking my talis? Lav mishum de islach zuzi gaboy, it's because I owe you money. And you're afraid that I'm going to deny this money that I owe you. But I'm not going to do that. You don't deny me my garment, I'm not going to deny it, I'm going to give you the money. Don't just hold the garment permissibly according to what I owe you, don't do that. Rather, let's take it out and put it in front of people. They're able to do an evaluation. And then we can evaluate and see what it's really worth. And you can take whatever is yours based on that, meaning the garment might be worth more money than I actually owe you. You'll take up to the value. And then give me back whatever remaining value there is, meaning if you keep the garment, but let's say the garment is worth more than the amount that I owe you, so you'll return to me the extra if there is in fact extra, and that would be a way to kind of convince the launderer to take out the garment. Again, there really is no debt. You're not actually going to have to pay the debt, but that's a way that you might be able to win the case. But the Gemara continues, Amarle Ravacha Breder Ravavi Ravashi, Ravacha the son of Ravavia said to Ravashi, that's not going to really work, because Matzi Amarle, because the launderer can just say back to him, Lo tzrichna l'shum v'didach, I don't need your evaluation. Kvar shamua kamoy dekamach, it's already been evaluated, it's not even worth the amount of money you owe me. Essentially, Ravacha Breder Ravavi is saying the launderer will certainly recognize the scheme and he's not going to bring out the garment. And the Rashbam says, the Uman, for sure, this person, he himself is a cheater, he recognizes this other guy is cheating, he's recognizing that he's lying. V'yomar, he'll just say, I don't need your evaluation. Other people already evaluated before you came. It's not worth anything more than what you owe me, and so therefore this really is not going to be effective. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Oris ein lo chazaka. A sharecropper also cannot establish a chazaka because he's on the land as a sharecropper. Therefore, it's no evidence that the land is his. There's no reason that the owner should have protested, and therefore he cannot establish a chazaka. But the Gemara questions this, Amai, why is that true? Why can't he establish a chazaka? Adho idna palga v'hashtakula, because presumably until now, he was just taking half. Sharecroppers only take half. Now he's taking all of the produce. So he is doing something different that should be able to establish a chazaka. If the owner wants to protest, he should have protested. The fact that he didn't should allow the Aris to establish a chazaka. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yochanan says, Ba'arisei batei avos. We're talking about arisei batei avos, which essentially means they're there for generations already as sharecroppers of this land. In those situations, they actually would do multiple years at a time that they would take all the produce, and then there would be other multiple years where the owner would take the produce. That's just how they did it. In those situations, he's not able to establish a chazaka, even if he takes from the entire field. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Nachman says, Aris shahorid arisin tachtav. Let's say you have an Aris talking here about an Aris batei avos, again, been there for generations, and then in those years when they're supposed to take 100%, let's say they don't want to work the field, so they hire their own sharecroppers, and they say, you know what, you take 50%, and I'll take 50%, because this is their year where they get 100%. So over there, if they're hiring other sharecroppers, yesh lo chazaka, there actually is a chazaka. My time, and what's the reason why an Aris can establish a chazaka? He's entitled to 100% as a sharecropper. Why is he suddenly able to establish a chazaka? Very simply, a person doesn't allow someone else to hire sharecroppers to work his property, and he's quiet. He will certainly protest. The real owner will not allow his sharecropper to hire other workers, and so therefore that would be a way for the Aris batei avos to establish a chazaka. And the Rashbam explains, Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Masnisin ba'arisei batei avos ma'iri. Again, our mission is talking about arisei batei avos. Sheregilan lishmor sadas shel mishbacha zu me'olam hein v'avosein ba'arisos. They used to watch the fields of this particular family already for generations. V'lo yecholim la'achlifo ba'arisim achim. They wouldn't switch it for other sharecroppers. V'yosan arisim noagim lechol kol ha'peros beis v'gimel shanim. Those kind of sharecroppers, they would eat all of the produce for 2 or 3 years. And so again, that's why it doesn't establish a chazaka. And then again, the Gemara continued, Aris shel batei avos. If you have again this kind of Aris batei avos, shahorid arisin tachtav, which then hired other sharecroppers for osan gimel shanim shayelo lechol, for those 3 years which he was supposed to get everything. V'hu lo asa imoy, and Klumen he doesn't do any work. Yesh lo chazaka. That actually would be a chazaka. To lo avid balabayis denachti arisin nochrim biari, because an owner is not going to allow some arisim sharecroppers who are strangers into his property below reshusa without his permission. V'shasa can be quiet. Shami yikalkalu sados, if he's afraid that maybe they're going to ruin his fields. Ela imkein osa aris atzmo iman, unless he actually sees the sharecropper, his own sharecropper, working with them, v'roa ma'imosim, who watches what they're doing, kidalakame, as the Gemara will explain as it goes on. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Aris shachilek la'arisin, if a sharecropper divides out the work to other sharecroppers, ein lo chazaka, he's not able to make a chazaka. My time, and what's the reason? Amor harmanya shavya, we'll take out the word bialma, the Rashbam doesn't seem to have it. Amor harmanya shavya, we can say that he allowed him to be like an administrator. And the Rashbam explains, as we mentioned before, that the case over here is that the Aris, he is hiring other arisim, he's hiring other sharecroppers, but in this case, he's actually working the field together with them. So that already is something that the owner would not necessarily protest, because that he allows. As long as the main sharecropper is working together with the other arisim, the owner would be fine with that, and that's why in this situation it does not establish a chazaka. He's just working the field as an Aris, as he is supposed to. And the Gemara continues, Shalach le Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda Rav Nachman bar Yaakov. Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda sent Rav Nachman bar Yaakov, Yelamdeinu Rabbeinu, teach us our Rebbe, Aris meid o eino meid. Is a sharecropper allowed to testify on behalf of the owner to keep the land in the hands of the owner, or is he not allowed to testify? Maybe he's considered nogeya bedover, it's considered self-interest, he's biased. Havi Yosef, Rav Yosef Kamei, Rav Yosef was sitting in front of him, Amar Le, he said to him, Hachi Amar Shmuel, this is what Shmuel says about the question, Aris meid, that a sharecropper is indeed allowed to testify. The Gemara says, V'atanyo eino meid, but didn't we learn a brisa, he's not allowed to testify, he is biased. And the Gemara says, Lo kash, it's not difficult, Hadi ika pera biara, v'had leka pera biara. In one case we're talking where there is produce in the land, in the other case we're talking where there's no produce in the land. The Rashbam explains, Hadi ika pera biara, sha'adayin lo nata la'aris chelko, meaning if the sharecropper has not yet taken the produce from this land, he hasn't taken his portion, eino meid, that's when he's not allowed to testify. The nichale, to take up yad Ruven, he wants the land to stay with Ruven the owner. The shakale Shimon, because if the other guy takes it, if Shimon takes the land, yitol gam ha'peros kedin nigzal, then he's going to take the peiros as well. That's like a case where it was stolen from him. And so therefore, of course, in such a situation where he hasn't gotten his share yet, he has a self-interest. He wants it to stay with Reuven so that he can collect the peiros. That's why in that situation, he's not allowed to testify. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Arev Meyed Lalova, a guarantor is allowed to testify on behalf of a borrower. This is talking about testifying about a particular piece of land that the borrower owns. He's allowed to do that to keep the land in the hands of the borrower. Now that's only true if the borrower had other land as well. If this is the only land the borrower will have, then that's a problem because the Arev is Nogea Bedover. He has a self-interest. He wants the borrower to have land so that he doesn't have to pay the loan. Instead, the borrower will pay off the loan. So in that situation, if the borrower had no other land, then the Arev would not be allowed to testify on behalf of the Lova. Similarly, Malva Meid Lova, a lender can testify for the borrower. Again, that's only if the borrower has other land. If the borrower has no other land, of course, the lender has a self-interest that the borrower should have this land so he'll be able to collect his loan. And similarly, Lokeach Rishon, a first buyer, Meid Lokeach Sheni, he's allowed to testify for a second buyer. The idea over here is they're all buying from the same seller, and they understand that there might be a lien on the seller's property. Now, the way it works is the Lokeach Rishon, he's protected. He buys a piece of land from the seller. As long as he left the seller with some land of his own, then that land will be collected first. And even if the seller sells that land to a second buyer, you go to the second buyer before the first. And so in this situation, we're saying the first buyer, can testify to keep the land in the hands of the second buyer. Again, same idea. That's only if the second buyer also has other land that he bought from the seller that there is a lien on, because then again, just keeping this little piece of property with the second buyer doesn't change anything from the first buyer. If there are other properties that the creditor of the seller can come to the second buyer to collect from. But again, if there's no other property, let's say this property of the second buyer is the only property with a lien on it before the property of the first buyer. So now the first buyer has a self-interest. He wants the second buyer to have that property, because if the second buyer does not get that property, now the lien falls on his own property, so he would not be able to testify in that situation. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Zayin Amud Aleph.